Good afternoon. I'm Mike, and today we're going to look at Chapter 3 of the book, Crucial Influence, by Grenny, Patterson, Maxfield, McMillan, and Switzler. We've already looked at the introduction, where it talks about the 6 sources of influence. And now we'll move on to the first source, personal motivation. Help them love what they hate. A leader might look and think about, is this pleasurable for them to do this? Is it painful? Do they enjoy it? That's something we often attribute behavior to, is whether they're personally motivated to. So that's the first factor that the authors address. It's definitely not the only factor that needs to be addressed. How can we make something that's uncomfortable more enjoyable to do? People can actually take enjoyment from a lot of different activities, even if it's not enjoyable. And the authors give some examples here, but people find ways to make unenjoyable behaviors more enjoyable. For example, they mention about feeling a sense of accomplishment by finishing tasks on time, or doing something that takes work now, but at the same time, they're finding meaning in that work, and they know that it's making them happy in the long term. So that's part of what makes something that's not enjoyable more pleasurable. One way to change our feelings about what we're doing is to frame it in a way that has to do with morality. For example, what does this work mean? It's not entirely enjoyable to get up at like 5 a.m. and to be doing something, but at the same time, putting in that extra effort, disciplining to get enough sleep, in the long term, you might be doing work which you find more meaningful. And so that getting up early, it might be slightly unenjoyable, but overall, you're feeling a sense of satisfaction. You're feeling a sense of well-being, even. The authors did mention again about the fundamental attribution error. And that's where we think that somebody's doing something a certain way because of it's their fault, because they're motivated to do it that way. When really there might be other factors that are playing into why they're behaving a certain way. So it's called the fundamental attribution error. You may have heard of it, that it's that person that we need to look at. And oftentimes we might think that there's some kind of a malicious intent, or, they might be doing it intentionally. But it may be that they're just not aware of what they're doing. So the authors, when talking about changing behavior by influencing personal motivation, they talk about reframing behavior. And four ways to influence personal motivation are to allow for choice, create direct experiences, tell meaningful stories, and make it a game. Allowing for choice. There's a quote from Peter Block here that says, "If we cannot say no, then saying yes has no meaning." If you're just told to do something, they're always going to be resistant, because if they can't even say no, then what does the yes mean exactly? That's the first way to involve people, allowing them to feel enjoyment in what they're doing. It's not because they're forced to do it, but because they have the ability to choose to do it. And they actually talk about Dr. William Miller. He is a proponent of motivational interviewing, which is also been incorporated in coaching techniques. And he talks about how people have a sincere motivation to change, for instance, with changing certain unhealthy behaviors. He talks about drug addicts or maybe people who drink a lot of alcohol that's getting in the way of their lives. They really are motivated to change, but at the same time, there's a blockage and they maybe don't have the ability. Just confronting that individual is probably not enough. There needs to be more that's addressed. And actually, by the way, coaching is one way. Of course, coaching generally works with individuals who are more resilient and who have that intrinsic motivation to make a change. In the case of psychologists, they can work more with situations where a person needs more clinical help. For instance, if they're heavily addicted to drugs or alcohol. But what psychologists have found is that they may be motivated to change. They may truly want to make a difference in their life. And yet there are other factors that need to be addressed. So demanding that people change rarely leads to the long-lasting change that we're looking for. Choice, as mentioned, was one way. And instead of just confronting problems, they can be reframed in a way that people can choose to change their behavior on their own terms. So as with coaching, for example, instead of looking at it as a behavior that just needs to be changed, but we don't know how, we can reframe it as saying that, well, this will allow you to do this instead. This will allow you to have a healthier life, maybe have better relationships. And so reframing it, now it becomes more enjoyable because the person's choosing that, yes, I'm getting some satisfaction out of spending more time with my family now, or I'm able to actually do these physical activities because of this behavior change. The next tactic mentioned was to create direct experiences. And for that, they mentioned that the best way to build a sense of mission in an organization is to tell a story that's relatable, something that we remember, something that we can be driven by. It's not, the mission would not just be some kind of abstract words, but it's something that our heart can connect with. They say that creating vicarious experiences can be done through telling stories. And I'll let you look at some of the examples they have here in the book. But as you can imagine, there is some driving force behind the meaning for why people do certain kinds of work. It's not just going to work, but there is an impact that people are making. What is that impact? Is it meaningful? What's the story behind it? And the last tactic, to make it a game. And here this just addresses a basic human desire to feel accomplishment, maybe a sense of competitiveness, a drive to improve, and also control to an extent. So people can get lost in a flow of feeling that they're accomplishing and enjoy themselves, even if the task itself is not, pleasurable for them, but they've gamified it. So now it's a driving force to feel accomplishments. And also there's the competitive factors as well. So you might enjoy actually, encouraging your peers to actually behave in those certain ways. One thing I can remember from my experience is, for example, working at a spa, doing massage therapy. Oftentimes they'll have a board up with all the therapist names. and what percentage, what percentage requests they've had for the month. They don't really do that as much anymore. But, what's the most upgrades that a person has sold? How many how many upgrades, what percentage, what's the biggest ticket or the amount of sales that they've had on a service. And then it's kind of like a leaderboard. So every month you see people kind of shuffling around like, oh, that person, that they beat me this month, but oh, this person's doing pretty good. Right, got to get myself up to that kind of that level and be in that group here that's doing well and not be just average, basically. So that kind of gamifies it. And that can improve sales, it can improve client retention, and also a bit of employee engagement as well. So keeping score, a sense of competition, and reframing any unpleasant habits to a gamified satisfaction. As a recap, for personal motivation, as we frame things differently, they can become more pleasurable to do. And some of the tactics are allowing for choice, creating direct experiences, telling meaningful stories, and making it a game. What an influential leader does, the authors mentioned, is that instead of giving them a task to do, we help them find their own reason for choosing to do a certain behavior. And I'd invite you to think about your organization. If you're a leader in a position of leadership, what are some different ways that you can reframe how things are done to increase that personal motivation?